In the late 80s, young Evan lives happily with his dog and his mother Andrea. When she drops him at school, the teacher asks Andrea to come in for a talk. The teacher explains she asked the kids to draw what they want to be in the future, and Evan made a disturbing drawing of a murder. When the teacher asked him about it, Evan didn't remember doing it. In the evening, Andrea takes Evan to a mental institution so the doctor can run some tests. She's worried that Evan may have the same mental illness as his father. The doctor tells her that Evan should start keeping a journal about his everyday life. Hopefully it can help him jog his memory. The next day, Evan starts writing down everything he does. When Andrea turns around, she's horrified to see him holding a knife. Evan snaps out of a weird trance and doesn't remember when he grabbed the knife. Afterward, Andrea drops Evan at the house of his friends Kaylee and Tommy. Their divorced father George has acquired a new camera and wants to make some fun films with the kids, but he makes them promise they'll keep this a secret. Tommy gets angry because Evan is taking his place. Moments later, Evan snaps out of another trance and finds himself in the basement with Kaylee. Neither of them are wearing clothes and George is filming them while drinking. Evan freaks out because he doesn't remember how he got there, and George stops being nice, insulting the kid and threatening to call Andrea to tell her he's been misbehaving. Kaylee doesn't react when Evan talks to her, and Tommy watches them with fury while breaking a doll. When Andrea returns to the mental institution, the doctor says the tests don't show anything wrong with Evan and his memory issues may be stress-related. He theorizes he may have father issues because Evan never met his dad, who is a permanent patient there. Hoping it may help the kid, Andrea agrees to organize a meeting. Jason is brought to Evan after the doctors sedate him and handcuff him. After a few nice words, Evan has another memory lapse and suddenly he's on the floor while his father is trying to choke him. He says that Evan must die because it's the only way. The guards immediately come to hold him back and are forced to hit him to make him stop. They were supposed to knock him out, but they end up killing him. Later during the funeral, Kaylee holds Evan's hand. 6 years later, Evan is hanging out with the siblings and their friend Lenny. They're smoking in secret and Tommy is always mocking Lenny. Since he's bored, Tommy takes out George's hidden firework. He dares Lenny to play a prank and Lenny puts the firework inside a mailbox. At that moment, Evan has another memory lapse, and when he wakes up, he and Tommy are dragging an unresponsive Lenny away. Soon an ambulance is taking Lenny to the hospital, and when Andrea asks what happened, Tommy says they were just playing when Lenny suddenly freaked out. Evan cries because he can't remember what happened. Later at home, Evan finds a mysterious box with old pictures and an envelope with his grandfather's death certificate, which reveals he also died in a mental institute. Afterward, Andrea takes Evan to the institute and the doctor hypnotizes him to try to get the memory of what happened to Lenny. Evan squirms in pain while remembering a car arriving near the mailbox, but his memory stops there and his nose starts bleeding. The doctor has no choice but to wake him up, and Evan doesn't remember anything he said. The next time Evan hangs out with the siblings, he asks what really happened, but Tommy pushes him against the wall and tells him to never speak of it again. They watch a movie together and Tommy keeps talking through it. Suddenly Kaylee runs out of the theater and Evan follows her. She hasn't been the same since the incident and has scars on her arm because George beat her, blaming his kids for what happened to Lenny. Evan comforts her and they share a kiss, which is seen by Tommy. He gets angry and tries to stop them, only for a random guy to make him trip. Furious, Tommy starts beating the guy up and security has to drag him out. Sometime later, Evan and Kaylee visit Lenny behind his parents' backs. Lenny only agrees to go with them when he sees Tommy isn't around. However, when they go to the forest, they find Tommy putting Evan's dog inside a bag and covering it with gas. Evan tries to stop him and Tommy attacks with a piece of wood, but he misses Evan and hits Kaylee instead. Then he beats Evan up and gets ready to light the dog on fire. Evan tries to stop him again, only to have another blackout. When he wakes up, his face is severely wounded and the dog is dead. Afterward, Andrea decides they're moving. On the day Evan leaves, he sees Kaylee running after the truck, so he writes, "I'll come back for you." 7 years later, Evan is studying psychology in college and he shares a room with a guy named Thumper. One night he realizes he hasn't had any blackouts since he moved from his childhood town, so he and Thumper go to a bar to celebrate. Some frat boys keep mocking Thumper for his appearance and Thumper breaks their beer jar with a pool ball. When the group gets angry, Thumper breaks the cue stick to look threatening and the guys back off. Afterward, Evan takes a girl to his dorm and she finds his old journals, so she asks him to read something. As Evan reads about the dog incident, his vision gets blurry and he suddenly appears inside his teenage body at exactly that moment. Tommy beats him up some more while Lenny tries to save the dog, but he can't open the bag. Tommy threatens to hurt Lenny's mother to make him move and gets ready to burn the dog, but at that moment adult Evan wakes up in his dorm again. The girl tells him he passed out. The next day Evan returns to his childhood neighborhood to visit Lenny, who has never left his room. He spends the whole day making models and almost never speaks. Evan tries to get him to talk about the dog incident and Lenny repeats what Tommy said, confirming that what Evan saw was real. Then Lenny pushes Evan against the furniture and quotes Tommy again, telling him to keep the secret. When he returns to his dorm, Evan starts going through his journals and finds the mailbox section. Reading that section transports him to that moment and the shock causes him to drop his cigarette, which leaves a burned scar on his stomach. A woman and her baby arrive in a car and check the mailbox at the same time it explodes, which leaves Lenny traumatized with guilt. Evan wakes up in his dorm and throws up before noticing the scar on his stomach. Then he tries calling Lenny, but his mother tells him to never call again because his visit really upset Lenny. That night Evan has dinner with his mom and asks her if his dad ever found a way to get his memories back. Andrea says that Jason did figure something out when he was Evan's age, but she isn't sure if it was real or his imagination. Before he was locked up he also said he could do something amazing, but Andrea refuses to say what. After dinner, Andrea drags Evan to see a psychic just for fun. However, the psychic freaks out when she reads Evan's hand and discovers he has no lifeline. She says Evan has no soul, doesn't belong there, and was never meant to be. Andrea gets upset and runs out, so Evan follows her. She's crying because the psychic hit a nerve. It turns out that before Evan she had 2 stillbirths. The next day Evan tries his journals again, but Thumper stops him, saying there's probably a reason why he repressed those memories. Afterward Evan goes to a diner where Kaylee works as a waitress and they see each other for the first time since he left. She shares that Tommy was in juvie for a few years but nowadays he works as a mechanic. Kaylee emancipated herself at 15 and couldn't move with her mom because she had a new family. Evan tries to ask what happened in the basement when they were kids and Kaylee freaks out because she can't believe he came back for this. Her reaction confirms George made dirty movies with the kids. After yelling at Evan, Kaylee runs away. The following morning Evan finds a voicemail from Tommy, saying that Kaylee self-deleted last night. A devastated Evan goes to the funeral but waits for the family to be gone before dropping into the grave flowers and the note he wrote the day he left. When he returns to his dorm, Evan reads the journal entry about the movie and travels back to that moment. George is asking the kids to take off their clothes, so Evan tells Kaylee to cover her ears before he starts insulting George, threatening to castrate him if he doesn't treat Kaylee better. Then he makes Kaylee say never touch me again. When Evan returns to his time, his nose bleeds while he discovers he's changed the past and now his life is completely different. New memories flood his mind, revealing that after he moved away Kaylee would sneak out of her house to visit him and eventually they started dating. In fact, Kaylee is next to him on the bed, which belongs to her sorority. Soon they go to class and he notices they're the popular students. Evan asks Kaylee about George's camera and she says her dad got rid of it soon after buying it. Afterward Evan tries calling his mom but the answer machine picks up. The voices in the recorded message reveals Andrea got married again. At that moment he sees Thumper walk by and tries to say hi, but Thumper doesn't know him and calls him frat boy. Then he goes to class but the teacher isn't as friendly as usual. One of the frat boys that bothered Thumper appears to be Evan's friend and gives him the answers to the test, but Evan throws them away. That night Evan and Kaylee do the naughty and she's impressed by his new tricks. The phone rings but when Evan picks it up, the other person hangs up. The next day Evan has to help the other frat boys receive the newbies, putting them through various humiliating tasks. Evan tries to be mean to avoid suspicion, but he isn't good at it and finishes the ceremony too quickly. That night Evan prepares a fancy dinner for Kaylee but the romantic moment is interrupted when the frat boys tell him his car was destroyed. Evan runs to check on the vehicle and finds a dog collar. Kaylee reveals Tommy was released from jail recently and thinks he did this. They argue about Tommy's life choices and Kaylee explains that George never touched her, but he violently unleashed all his anger on Tommy. Then Evan offers to walk Kaylee back to the sorority house and Kaylee uses the chance to say he's been acting weird. Suddenly they see Evan's jacket on the grass and Tommy appears before them with a bat. After some arguing, Tommy starts beating up Evan, who responds by shooting pepper spray on his eyes. While Kaylee runs to call the police, Evan starts beating Tommy up for ruining Lenny's life and killing his dog, the mother, and her baby. He's so furious that he loses control and smashes Tommy's head with the bat, killing him. Afterward Evan is sent to jail, where all the prisoners harass him for being a privileged boy and steal his food during lunch. Andrea comes to visit him and brings him his journals like he asked. When he tries to return to his cell, the prisoners surround him and destroy his journals before they start beating him up. The cops take their sweet time stopping the fight and a prisoner promises they'll still visit Evan tonight. Then Evan returns to his cell with the few journal pages he's managed to save, but they aren't useful. That night, the other prisoners bribe a cop and get access to Evan to abuse him. The next day Evan hears a man read his journal aloud so everyone laughs at him. Desperate to change things, he uses the pages he has and asks his very religious cellmate Carlos to watch over him. He returns to the day he made the creepy drawing at school and quickly hurts his hands. When he wakes up, he has new scars and Carlos thinks they're Jesus marks, so he agrees to do anything for Evan. Moments later Evan goes to see his harassers and pretends he's willing to do what they say to get his journals, so the men ask him to get on his knees to get naughty. Once he's close enough, Evan stabs a prisoner a couple of times and Carlos rushes in to knock out the other guy. Then Carlos closes the cell while Evan grabs his journals to start reading. This time he travels to the moment before they find Tommy with the dog. He picks up a piece of metal to cut the bag and gives it to Lenny, telling him this is his chance to redeem himself for the lives of the mother and the baby. Then the group finds Tommy and Evan knows exactly what to say to calm him down. Tommy releases the dog only to get stabbed by Lenny, who who is still traumatized by the death of the baby and Tommy's harassment. When Evan wakes up, he's back in his first dorm, but now his things and Thumper's are on opposite sides. His nose starts bleeding and he has a seizure as new memories appear. Lenny was sent to a mental institution and Kaylee ran away from home. Thumper finds Evan on the floor and immediately calls 911. Later at the hospital, the doctor runs some tests and says he never saw something like this before, but to be fair, these tests didn't exist during Jason's time. The bleeding is coming from the part of the brain where the memories are stored and his head is overloaded, almost as if he's jammed 40 years of memories in just a few days. The doctor has no explanation and Evan leaves after secretly stealing his keycard. He sneaks around the building until he finds Lenny, who is tied to a stretcher. At first Lenny doesn't reply to anything he says, but when Evan is about to leave, Lenny points out Evan always knew something would happen that day and he should be in his place right now. After returning to college, Evan reads the journal to travel to the day he met his father. Evan asks him how to fix things, but Jason says there's no way to change who people are without destroying who they were. Seeing as his son is trying to play God, Jason jumps on him to try to kill him, but Evan then wakes up on campus. Next, Evan goes to the diner to look for Kaylee, but they don't recognize her name. He immediately drives back to his childhood town and threatens George until he tells him where to find her. A few hours later, Evan arrives at a shady neighborhood and finds Kaylee living in an awful building. She doesn't look well either because she's been working as a naughty lady and she's an addict. Evan has to pay her to spend time with her and takes her to a cafe where he tells her everything, but she doesn't believe his time-traveling story. Kaylee says that if he really wants to help people, he should save the mother and the baby, then she leaves. Evan rushes back to his dorm and finds Thumper with a woman on his bed. He kicks them both out and starts reading his journal to return to the moment of the firework. He runs to warn the mother and Tommy follows him, tackling the woman to the ground just in time. However, Evan is caught directly by the explosion and when he wakes up, he's missing both arms. Memories soon start to change and he sees that the four kids grew up together very happily, but Evan was on a wheelchair and always needed help. Now in college, Lenny is his roommate and he's dating Kaylee. The couple notices he's bleeding and tries to take him to the hospital. However, Evan throws himself off the chair and tells them to keep him there. People in the corridor mock him and Kaylee calls them out for their bigotry. Moments later they meet with Tommy, who is now a religious man. Evan is in a bad mood and keeps being rude, so Kaylee takes him for a stroll. When Evan asks her if she ever thought about them being together, Kaylee admits she used to like him when they were kids. In fact, when her parents divorced, she chose to stay with her dad so she could still hang out with Evan. Seeing Lenny and Kaylee happy together really upsets him, so Evan fills his tub and tries to self-delete. Tommy arrives and saves him at the last second. Afterward they visit Andrea, who is at the hospital. It turns out she developed lung cancer for smoking too much after Evan became disabled. He tells her he's gonna fix this, and Andrea thinks he sounds like his father. Evan returns to his dorm and with Lenny's help he finds the right journal. He goes back to the day he started writing his memories and looks for something to destroy the firework, which is when Andrea finds him with a knife. Evan wakes up in the present with no changes, so he asks Lenny to change to another page. This time he returns to the basement scene and he finds the hidden firework, so he lights it up to threaten George. The man smacks it off his hands and it's picked up by Kaylee right as it blows up. Afterward, Evan wakes up in a mental institution. His nose bleeds as he gets the new memories, revealing that Kaylee died that day and he's been medicated since then. He runs out of his room and asks the doctor for his journals, but the doctor says they never existed. The doctor theorizes they're part of a fantasy Evan created to cope with the guilt of killing Kaylee. This reminds him of Jason, who always screamed about a photo album he never had. Suddenly Evan collapses and the doctor runs some tests. When Evan wakes up, he learns his brain has irreversible damage and he'll be transferred in the morning. Andrea is devastated by the news, but she still brings the home movies Evan asked for. He thinks everything is real and he just didn't write the journals in this timeline, so he still hopes to fix things through a different method. That night Evan sneaks around and breaks into the doctor's office, blocking the door with a couch when he hears the alarm go off. While the guards look for him, Evan writes a goodbye note before playing a home movie, which shows a pregnant Andrea. Evan travels to his baby self inside the womb, remembering the words from the psychic, "He was never meant to be. As long as he is around, his friends will never be happy." Andrea begins yelling in pain while Evan uses the umbilical cord to self-delete. This way he stops the multi-generational curse from happening ever again. His mother has another stillbirth, and since earlier she mentioned that her previous 2 pregnancies ended up the same way, it seems Evan's siblings reached the same conclusion as him. As baby Evan dies by strangulation, the timeline is rebuilt. Without Evan, Tommy and Kaylee choose to live with their mother so they grow up happy and successful, eventually forming their own families. Without Tommy tormenting him, Lenny grows up happy as well. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.